So I wanted to do a quick video. It probably won't be very quick, actually, on my thoughts on Set 4 overall, now that Set 4 is coming to a close. So just kind of go through some of the things, some of the champions, some of the traits and classes, along with some of the system changes that have come and gone throughout the set. So I'll mostly talk about the set itself and less about the systems changes, but let's go ahead and start going through this. Am I on the right page? I am on the wrong page. I feel really bad about that. I wasn't paying attention, and that makes me feel really bad. Okay, so let's start with the big thing that we got in Set 4, and that was the Chosen mechanic. So the Chosen mechanic was the big sell for Set 4. Like how in Set 3, it was the Galaxies mechanic was the big sell there. Set 2 was the Elemental Hexes, I guess. That was the big sell there. I'm of the opinion each set we've kind of upped the ante here, and this was kind of the biggest jump in changing on how the game is played in adding this Chosen mechanic. So when the Chosen mechanic first came into existence, I did like it. I did enjoy it. I thought it made a lot of unique directions that you could take your composition towards, where it allowed you to play, or I thought it allowed you to play very flexibly. But the downside to the Chosen mechanic was it really didn't. It kind of did the exact opposite in that the comps you played your Chosens in were very inflexible. You got if you got a Chosen that you wanted, now you had to hope that you get the items you wanted. Typically in TFT, or at least in the existence of TFT, the comp you picked was dependent upon your items. The Chosen mechanic kind of warped that. The Chosen mechanic made it so that your composition was now dependent upon your Chosen instead of your items. This often meant that in the early game, you slammed flexibly, if you had to slam. There were some times you didn't really have to slam, but there were many points in Set 4 where you just had to slam items to save HP. So, oftentimes what would happen was you'd get the Chosen you wanted, you'd have these flexible items, and then this hodgepodge of other items that you somehow need to figure out how to put on a carry. That's where I think kind of some of the trouble in the Chosen mechanic came from. In all seriousness, we were really limited on our items. A lot of the carries, their items were inflexible. You needed very specific items on very specific champions. This really wasn't as much as a problem in OG Set 4, but this was a pretty big problem in 4.5, I thought. So, the Chosen mechanic, overall, I did like it when it first came out, but after X amount of games I had played on it, I had come to like it less and less. I'm kind of happy that it's going away. It might come back. I probably wouldn't mind it coming back if we could get some of the inflexibility out of it. I think there were probably better ways to run the Chosen mechanic. Like, maybe, for example, only specific champions would appear as a Chosen. So, like, maybe there were no carries that came out as Chosen. Just for an example. Or maybe only carries came out as a Chosen. So, while I'm happy to see it go, I would also like to see it come back, but in a different version than what it was here. I know one thing that was talked about a lot with the Chosen mechanic was, what if the Chosen mechanic only gave you a 1-star? I've kind of wondered what the game would look like if they did that. I would highly suspect Riot has tested that multiple times. What the Chosen mechanic looks like when the Chosen, instead of being a 2-star, was a 1-star. And my understanding of how that kind of worked out was it made your 1-star, though you were just less likely to pick up the Chosen. There just really wasn't a reason to pick up a 1-star Chosen. Whereas when it was a 2-star, it was far more useful, obviously. I think the main issue with the 1-star versus 2-star came when you were talking about 4-cost and 5-cost champions. It's a big power spike when you get a 2-cost, a 2-star 4-cost or a 2-star 5-cost. That's huge for your composition, and that just is entirely RNG. Like, it really is. Do you just get this random champion that fits all the items you've been building up to this point, and it just plops right in your shop as a 2-star? That kind of wore down its welcome as we got later into the set. Just that particular point of RNG just showing up and kind of blowing up games. I think I really said enough about the chosen mechanic. I'm welcoming the new set coming out where that's not in there, but there are other things about the new set that I'm a little more worried about. But we'll see on that. Anyway, let's start going through some of the traits. Cultist went through so many balance changes throughout its duration that I'm kind of just like, guys. So one of the things that I think Riot has settled on is that this idea of a mech-style champion, a mech-style trait, a trait where a champion gets better stats as you have more of that. It basically summons a champion that has better stats based on having more of these particular champions. It's a cool idea. It's in set 5 as well. Very, very similar to what we have with Cultist, but now with items, interestingly enough. But Cultist was a pretty good idea. It worked really well in set 4. In set 4.5, it had a little more of issues because it didn't really have an end game. Because all the champions, it had one 4-cost champion that wasn't a carry, and one 5-cost champion that wasn't a carry. So your carry was a 3-cost. So and the synergy overlap within Cultist was a little awkward. In set 4, it was pretty easy to make a good Cultist 6 comp. In set 4.5, it wasn't. Like, Cultist was just meant to hold you on to moving to a late game comp. But I like the design of it. Moonlight. Moonlight was fun, but terrible to balanced. I mean, you could just see through all the changes that went through Moonlight over and over again. Moonlight was very, very difficult to balance, and I think at times Riot didn't really understand, like, what point was the cutoff here on Moonlight. So, like, in theory, the way Moonlight should work, Moonlight should kind of be like a bug Pokemon. So, if you know the theory of bug Pokemon, the idea of a bug Pokemon is that they evolve early, so they're really strong in the early game, but they peter off at the end. They don't gain a lot as you move into the end of the game. They're generally weak as you move to the end of the game. Well, that's kind of what Moonlight probably was supposed to be. But at the same time, you also kind of wanted it to be a carry. You wanted to see Moonlight win games. You wanted to see this 4-star champion just carry out and be super strong. But there were times where, like, depending on, like, what cost that champion was, kind of ran the problem. So eventually they hit Moonlight Diana pretty good. So Moonlight Diana, like, kind of hit a good spot. Moonlight Aphelios, like, never hit a good spot. Moonlight Aphelios was, like, completely busted at times. Part of it was because of how Aphelios functioned in throwing turrets and having his attack be based off the attacks on the turret being based off his attack speed, having low mana, Sojin tricks going. There were a lot of weird things going on with Aphelios in general that I think were really difficult to balance. But at the same time, because Aphelios was part of Moonlight, getting him up to 4-cost and just watching him run over entire teams was kind of ridiculous. So I suspect that's why Moonlight did not survive into 4.5, which is fair. But I mean, I kind of would have liked to see it stay around, and I kind of like to see it again with Riot taking another shot at Moonlight. Yeah, it would be interesting to see Moonlight come back in a different variation again. We already talked about Cultist. I should have just gone down here first. Divine kind of Divine went through cycles. There were times where Divine was really good and times where Divine was really bad. So in the end, what they settled on for Divine, I believe it was something like this, or was it set? No, they changed the duration, and so they perpetually were changing the damage reduced and the bonus true damage with the duration of it, and it just went in waves over and over again. Now, the thing with that was that it was really dependent on which of these champions decided it was going to be meta that week. So, like, the big one was always Warwick. When Warwick was meta with Hurricane, Divine was pretty busted. When Warwick wasn't meta, Divine was like, whatever, who cares? The thing with early set 4 Divine, it was just that the only carry here was Warwick. So when Warwick was great, Divine was great. When Warwick wasn't great, Divine was kind of meh. Dusk. So I love Dusk. Dusk was a great design, great champions within the trait. I have nothing but great things to say about Dusk. I loved it. It was also probably one of the most flexible comps in the game. You just run 4 Dusk champions, or if you had a Chosen, you would just run 3 or 6. I think 6 after. I think in general when I had Chosen, I ran 6, but when I didn't, I would just run 4. Yeah, that Dusk was what really made the Chosen mechanic work, because you could run a Dusk comp both with and without Chosen. If we were to go back to the Chosen mechanic, this is what I'd like to see. More of these traits where you could run both with the Chosen and without the Chosen with relative ease and still feel like both versions were pretty good. There was so much here that was great. Cassiopeia was a really cool design as like a frontline-ish spellcaster with a stun that was also a increase your team's MR. It's great. And Riven was also pretty much one of the only champions that had super flexible item design. This was something that kind of like happened a lot in this set, particularly 4.5. Champions didn't have a lot of flexibility on their items. Riven was different. Riven would basically take any defensive item you had, any tier item you had, any rod item you had. All of these were just great on Riven. It didn't really matter as long as it was like a rod. If it was a rod item, it was great on Riven. If it was a vest item, it was great on Riven. Didn't matter. So, and because Riven was Riven really wasn't the carry, but kind of was the carry in Dusk comps. All of Dusk was just great. I loved it. I just loved it. Nothing else I can say. Elderwood. Elderwood's another comp that kind of had its up and downs. So the idea of Elderwood was going to be an easy comp to pilot. Easy to play, easy to pilot. So if it was going to be easy to pilot, then they couldn't make it easy to win. Like, that's another thing you have to understand about easy to pilot comps. Easy to pilot comps can't be easy to win, or else everyone just does them. They need to, like, be kind of difficult to win. Like, you get good placements, but you don't always win. So that way people get interested in playing other comps as well. But Elderwood in particular was just a very easy comp to pilot. Elderwood Mage in particular. So you would just play your 6 Elderwood, have 3 Mages, and have a nice Vygar carry, and it was like just pop off. Or an Ashe carry. Both were valid. That was another nice thing about Elderwood. There was a lot of carries you could have in between Ashe and Vygar. But also, like, this particular fact of the trait, the way it increases your armor and MR, AD, and spell power every X amount of time, every 2 seconds, that meant it pretty much scaled with however you were building your comp. Like, really didn't matter what you were doing, Elderwood was still useful to have. So, the only issue I kind of had with this was probably with a champion like Nunu, when you started putting Elderwood with, like, huge brawlers, that when you started giving them all of this armor, MR, AD, and SP, a champion like Nunu with a gunblade kind of became invincible. You couldn't kill him. Same thing with a Vygar. Vygar with a gunblade could oftentimes just kind of become invincible, especially when you started combining them with Lulu. So I think the issues with Elderwood kind of was more in the champions that it had and how they functioned with Elderwood, more than just kind of Elderwood itself. Either way, Elderwood was a fine trait. There was nothing really wrong with it. Enlightened. So I didn't really have a good understanding coming into set 4 how Enlightened was going to work. What I didn't realize was that it was just going to be like a basic comp that we always played. Like Dusk, it was a super flexible comp. What you'll notice about super flexible comps in set 4 was almost all of them had a good 4-piece. And if you had a Chosen, they usually also had a good 6-piece. Now, the 6-piece in Enlightened I don't think was particularly useful until 4.5. I don't think you like really did it that often, because it often meant you had to run Fiora or Nami, and the trait just like wasn't that good. But when we went to 4.5, we lost Nami, but they kept the 6-piece, so now you need to have a Chosen and Fiora, so they buffed up the 6-piece. So that's something to kind of remember about Enlightened, that 6 Enlightened was actually good once they did that. But usually you just stuck with 4 and you played Janna, Aurelia, Morgana, Talon, and Talon was your carry. Now, Talon went through a bunch of iterations in set 4 because Talon did a bunch of weird shit in set 4. His targeting paradigm changed a bunch of times. His mana changed a few times. How much crit bonus he got changed a bunch of times. Talon kind of got frustrating to play against for a lot of people because it was often just like, oh, Talon just insta-killed my carry. Great. Yay, I can't do anything anymore. So Talon kind of had to go back into the blender to get changed a bunch of times because it was how frustrating he could be to play against. And there wasn't a lot of good ways to stop Talon from killing your carry. But otherwise, Enlighten was fine. The trait was fine. Morgana was actually a really cool design. Just to have this AoE damage dealer that did burn. It was really good design. Same thing with Aurelia. Aurelia was also really well designed as just like as a pure utility champion. That said, we did have some issues with Janna occasionally. If you've ever seen a duelist Janna, she's kind of insane, actually. Exile, yeah, we had Yasuo and Yone. Exile itself was fine. It was a very easy trait for you to kind of screw up your positioning with. No one ever did that. But like we had our Yasuo carry duelist, so just reroll Yasuo, and in the end you would hit your Yone and you could itemize up Yone. Yone went through a bunch of iterations as well, because I remember when his ult did a knock-up. Oh god, that was awful. So like yeah, Yone's like initial ult did a knock-up that stunned like everything, and if you had like a Yone too, then he would just ult over everything he stunned up, and they all just instantly die. It was so bad. They did eventually like nerf him to oblivion to the point they started buffing him up again later in 4.5, but oh man, was Yone ridiculous. Fortune. So I'm going to be honest, I didn't really play Fortune that much. That said, Fortune was probably the single best thing to come out of this set. Pure, plain and simple, Fortune was the single best idea in all of set 4. Easily. It was fun to play. It promoted losing, which is something that is actually kind of important in TFT that people don't realize, is that loss streaks are actually kind of important. You don't always want to win every round. And 3, it made wild videos. Some of the stuff you could pull off a Fortune loss streak, mind-blowing. And what made Fortune great to me was that it was unlike Space Pirates. The problem with Space Pirates is that when you ran 4 Space Pirates and you got to the point where you had your Gangplank in set 3 just blowing up the whole board and all these items coming to you, that was literally rich getting richer. That was that was a win comp. Like, you've already won the game, and now the person who's winning the game is just going to get more items to win the game. With Fortune, though, you had to go on a loss streak. You had to put yourself down at the bottom of the barrel on the particular lobby you were in. And then you had to figure out how to get your win on Fortune, and then rise your way back up to the top. It's not easy to do. It wasn't like set 3 Space Pirates where you just roll over the entire lobby. You get to level 8 early, you get your 2-star gangplank, and just the lobby falls over for you. This actually required some work. It required a little bit of luck, which it's fair. It's TFT. Like, it's basically a card game. You need some luck. There's definitely luck in this game. But overall, like, Fortune was great. We all should not be surprised that Draconic looks a lot like Fortune. We should not be surprised at all. Moonlight, we already talked kind of about Moonlight. Ninja, I don't really think Ninja really ever had its time in the sun. I also don't think there was a lot of comps where you ever even really wanted to run 2 or 3 ninjas. So you always usually just wanted... all your comps just carried 1. Yeah, there's really not much to say about ninjas. The only time I think ninjas was ever a thing was it was Zed and Akali carry. I really don't really know what to say here. Like, Ninja was kind of just a meh trait overall. It never really impacted the game that much, in my opinion. Spirit, oh lord, do I... Unfortunately, Spirit was a trait that Spirit's a trait I don't think we're ever going to see again. I don't think we're ever going to see anything like Spirit again. Increasing attack speed across an entire team is pretty dangerous, as we quickly learned. It increases the mana gain rate, increases the damage you dealt, like, everything, so much stuff scales off attack speed that Spirit was a humongous buff for your entire board. Plain and simple. Not to mention, the champions on it were all really annoying. Kindred was a great mid-game carry. Ari was an end-game carry. Yumi provided great utility, and as did Teemo provide great utility. Even in 4.5, this fact doesn't really change. There's so much utility and ability in Spirit that we're just not going to see this again. Too much stuff scales off Spirit. The boss. Okay, let's put this. Spirit set was one of the coolest champs they added in this set. There's nothing else to say. He's just awesome. Everything Set does is awesome. From the idea of him running off the battlefield to pump himself up, to coming back and doing the slam animation, that is easily one of the most pimp things you can watch in League, is watching Set slam things. It's just so much fun. I don't know what else to say. It's great. I love it. Probably the only bad thing I will say about Set was having his ult do damage based off of his target's HP often worked out to be very awkward in the end game. It made him way too good against brawlers. It made him way too good against tanks. It made him kind of just like a throw-in unit against certain compositions because you knew that his ult was going to blow shit up. But otherwise, Set was great. Kayn and Tormented. So I think the main thing with Kayn was that his form change system was far too balanced on the HP gain and not enough on the damage rate. So basically, unless you had a Gunblade, you always went for the HP regen. Always. Like, you just didn't. He also often scaled so high with spell power. He scaled a little too well with high spell power and crit gauntlet. in my opinion. He really kind of blew a lot of things up. Whereas I think I suspect they kind of viewed him as a little more of a utility and less as a pure damager and pure carry, because they gave him a mana reeve. So that's utility. But he did a lot of damage with crit gauntlets and spell power. Warlord. Warlord was a cool trait, but Warlord was also kind of a win more trait. Win more traits are kind of like, whatever, who cares? There's not much else I can really say about Warlord. Warlord's very self-explanatory. You slam the gas early to get the win streaks up, to make all of your Warlord champions better, and just like scale to infinity. Get a Warlord spat and play 9. Wasn't much else to say. I did have issues with Katarina's ult. Katarina's ult's really frustrating to play against, especially if she has a QSS. Like, even if she doesn't have a QSS, like, we probably shouldn't have these like mass AoE channel ults that kill everything. It'd be different if Katarina did less damage but also cost less mana. But she costs a lot of mana, and her ult like just kills everything that stays in its range. It's not really fun to play against because you're sitting here praying that a champion stuns it mid-ult, or that she ults somewhere useless. It's not. I'm gonna be honest. It's not fun to play with or against. So I'm happy to see, like, I'm hoping we don't see champions like this very much. Side note, Garen was a really good opener. Opening champion to play with. You could do a lot with the Garen early game. Don't be surprised if his spin to win ult style like makes a comeback somehow. Lastly, we'll talk about his year later. Yeah, we'll talk about his year later. Adept. Kind of like what I said about Spirit, I don't think we're going to see Adept again anytime soon. Part of the issue, there's multiple reasons for that. For one, it's hard to observe Adept actually doing anything on a board. If you know what Adept does, you can see it. But if you don't like really understand what Adept does, or you're new to TFT and you have Adept in, you don't really understand what's going on. You don't notice it. You don't see it. And that, I think, is pretty problematic for TFT. You should be able to like visually observe your traits doing something. I don't know if Adept ever did that. That said, Adept 3 and 4 was very strong. Adept 2 was kind of like, whatever. But Adept, throughout its lifetime, Adept 3 and 4 was incredibly strong. To the point that an Adept frontline of just these 3 units was often like very good in this game. Which is probably surprising because Shen is the only tank champion. Aurelia kind of, but it's probably more utility. And Yone is like more of a murderer. Not a carry, a murderer. I said that right. So to like have an Adept frontline, it feels odd. Because these champions probably aren't really frontliners, except Shen. Assassin never changed. I don't really have anything else to say about Assassin, except for Pike. Pike was a cool design, good, a utility backline jumper. Most of our backline jumpers just murder things. Pike didn't do that. Pike was like providing utility through like ranged stuns. Really good design. I do have to call that out. Whereas the rest of these just kind of murder things, and then there's Diana. Brawler's just frontliner. Don't really have anything else to say about it. Yeah. Dazzler. Dazzler's impact on the game, like Adept, was something that's a little difficult to notice. It happens. If you know what's going on, you can see it. But it's not, like, obvious what's going on when something gets hit with Dazzler. Also, most of the Dazzler champions, like, their abilities already had some sort of CC effect. Like Lissandra. like Lux, like Morgana, like Ezreal. Like, all of these already provided CC naturally. So, to give them more CC, like, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, personally. Um, so, could we see Dazzler again? Yeah, sure. I just don't know if they already Dazzler needs to go on all your champions that already have CC effects. Duelist did Duelist things. There's not much else to say here. Duelist. What was nice about Duelist was that it was a nice combination of carries and frontliners, along with a ranged unit in Callista. See, that's kind of the thing with some of these traits, is that if your entire trait baseline is all frontliners, uh, I don't know how to position. Do I just, like, sack everything on the front line? I don't know. So having a backliner like Callista, who is part of this trait, was actually pretty cool. There was also a lot of variety in Duelist. If you had a Duelist spat, you could run Duelist with any other carry. The Duelist spat was one of the strongest spats in the game, as you probably suspected me by when I told you that Spirit was way too strong. Attack speed boosts stacks over time, little crazy. Emperor. Okay, so now we're on to Azir. So, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Azir. Azir was a really cool champion. His ult providing this pretty large CC effect was balanced, useful. It was all you kind of wanted out of that ability. The two Sand Soldiers, I think, is where Azir got a little weird. So this particular Emperor trait. So being able to put like these Sand Soldiers in random positionings made positioning and Zephyring both very, very difficult. It gave you, like, you had two more champions you had to effectively position. And you had to make sure that if you were on the other side and you had a Zephyr, like, you didn't Zephyr as dumb Sand Soldier. This became even more problematic in 4.5 with the Lucky Lanterns and the target dummy. So you'd have this Azir, and you'd have two Sand Soldiers and a target dummy. Or, as was not very uncommon in high-level games, a person playing two Azirs and having four Sand Soldiers. This became hard to work around, hard to play against. I would think after that we'd have kind of a limit on the amount of extra bodies a champion puts onto the board. So, while I like Azir, and I like his design, I like his ult, I even like the ability of putting extra units on the board, I think the two Sand Guards was too much, and it probably should have just been one, and even let that one attack, the way Set 2 Azir attacked. Hunter. Hunter did a lot of damage. That's the general theme I'm going to say about Hunter. Hunter did a lot of damage. It was pretty problematic when you could combine all three of these champions together. There was an issue with Hunter and Warwick, though. I can't remember when that got fixed. But particularly, like, when you had a chosen Hunter, and you had Kindred and Ashe, it just did so much damage on the targets. It was kind of insane. Especially since a lot of people just stacked Ashe with damage items. Like, didn't even bother with defensive items, just stacked her with more damage items. So that every time one of these Hunter procs hit, it just killed whatever it hit. Just instantly died. Snap your fingers, dead. Not surprised that this went away when we moved into set 4.5, but this trait just kind of murdered stuff. Keeper. So Keeper kind of went through many waves. So when Keeper was kind of throughout most of TFT seen as like a mid-game comp to hold you over to moving to a late-game comp. It really wasn't until where we're at right now with set 4.5 did Keeper become its own comp. We all knew that Kennen was kind of ridiculous, that he did a lot of damage, but playing playing Kennen as a carry, I don't think really came into a lot of people's minds because he's hard to position. Keeper in general is a very inflexibly positioned comp. Um, so like getting all of this out, plus you were playing Elise, and Elise is like not even having a unit. Elise was just that bad. It really wasn't until Elise got a Mana Reeve that she was like an okay champion. But before that, Elise was just kind of awful. Jarvan was kind of meh. Like, Kennen is, like, in general kind of meh unless you get the right items on him. Ribbon was good. No, not much else I'd say there. And then Azir was a 5 call, so naturally good. Alright, moving on to Mage. So, let's talk about Mage. Mage had an issue. And Mage's issue really wasn't fixed until, like, midway. I'm not sure when they did it. I think it was actually on set 4.5, I think. But Mage had an issue. And Mage's issue was that in order to get a lot of good use out of Mage, you had to run 3 or 6. If you were running 6 mages, you had no frontline. There is only one frontline champion in this whole list of units here, and that's Annie. The rest were like utility, damage, utility, damage, damage, utility/damage. Really kind of did both. If they were going to make a comp like this that you were going to scale linearly, there needed to be more frontline here, and there wasn't. There just wasn't. So instead, you had to take advantage of the fact that you were getting double cast on some of the utility. So having 3 mage Nami, 3 mage Lulu, 3 mage Lilia, that was very useful because you just got double the utility on the board. But like I said, you really could not run 6 mage. It just wasn't possible to do it. You didn't have the board to do it at all. There just wasn't space to play all the champions you needed to have a front line with all these mages. But in set 4.5, they did fix this. In set 4.5, they decided to go 3-5-7. That made it a little more doable, because now if you had a Chosen, you only had to run 4 mages, and that allowed you to have a front line while still carrying 5 mage. So I would hope in future that if they're going to do traits like this, that they more balance out the units within the composition. I think the big thing to understand is there's really no reason to have more than 2 carries within a single trait. So in this particular mage, there were really 3 carries. Technically 4 if you want to include Nami, because Nami was weird. You had TF, who you could 3-star and was a carry. You had Vigar, who was a carry, and you had Ari, who was a carry. There wasn't a lot of logic in playing all 3 of these. There was rarely any logic between playing 2 of these, which is why this got really awkward. Mystic, there's not much to say about it. Mystic is Mystic. I'm not going to say anything. Shade. Yeah, Shade never really became a I shouldn't say Shade never became a thing. Where Shade became a thing was the aggro drop. If there was anything I think Riot has learned over the past couple sets, is that aggro drop is bad. People hate aggro drop. I'm going to disagree with that. I think aggro drop is okay, but people don't like it because it makes carries never die. Your unit just refocuses on a different unit. Now, I, as a player and an observer of the game, think that's actually kind of interesting. Because it makes it so that if you're observing an actual fight occur, the carry dying is like, fight's over, we're done, just go home. But if both sides, if their carry's still alive and pounding at each other, I mean, they're both still in the fight. So having a carry that doesn't die easily is interesting. Having a carry that does die easily and getting one shot instantly off the board in like the beginning of a fight, kind of boring and kind of depressing. But I understand why people don't like it, because it reduces the ability to counterplay these shades. I get it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to agree with it, but I get it. Sharpshooter. I was kind of surprised. So here's the thing with Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter in set 4 was interesting and good. The problem with it was that all the units in it were like not damage. So you basically had, so Nadine, Vayne, and Jin were damage. Oftentimes you would have these to carry items for your Jin later. And your plan was to run Teemo, Jinx, Jin, and have one of these be Sharpshooter chosen for 4 Sharpshooter. Because 2 Sharpshooter was useless. 4 Sharpshooter was busted. I think where most of the issue in Sharpshooter really came from was Jinx. The version of Jinx that came in set 4 was kind of nasty. There was a lot of oddities with her ult as well that eventually changed. She was still good when they changed her, but it was just kind of odd, some of the stuff that she would do. Because her ult was actually a replacement attack for an auto attack, so she could, if I recall correctly, she could gain mana off it, and it, like all sorts of weird stuff going on. Plus, Ricochet is counting for mana, combined with Sojin's on Jinx, meant she was ulting everything. Long story short, Jin was stun locking like half the board every fight. That was probably problematic. That's probably why Sharpshooter in general died. That and the fact that Jin had been around for too long. Because Jin was in all of set 3 as well, and he was one of the carries in set 3. But Jinx was kind of the problematic issue with Sharpshooter, and why we eventually lost Sharpshooter as a valid comp until, just kind of lost it. Like it wasn't a linear comp you could play anymore. Vanguard's Vanguard, but the one thing we do need to discuss about Vanguard was having both Aatrox and Sejuani as 4 cost, and having them both be so synergistic. Both these champions synergize very well, in case you didn't know. There's a lot of times you just play both, and that's your front line. It was too much of an instant answer to any problem of front line, which just play Aatrox, play Sejuani. I don't know what else to say. Like, it's... Also, it's worth noting that Vanguard was actually, in general, a pretty weak trait. It actually was not a very good front line. Most of your front lines were, like, itemized champions with, like, utility abilities. Like Aurelia. Aurelia was a better front line because she had Adept. Brawler was a better front line because it had way more HP. Armor, like, really did not mean that much. Which is why later in set 4.5, Vanguard also added MR. Alright, anything else left to talk about? I guess we can talk about some of the item changes. Oh yeah, Sunfire Cape. So Sunfire Cape was new, replacing Red Buff. Sunfire Cape worked out pretty well, I thought. Red Buff was problematic because of traits like Sharpshooter, where it made it way too easy to just send this burn across an entire comp and just like freely kill everything. So changing that to Sunfire Cape, also not to mention both the items were good items for frontline champions. So it was Vest and Belt. Both are things you want on your frontline champion. I thought this was fine. Gargoyle Stoneplate. So that replaced Swordbreaker. So Swordbreaker was an item that was either busted or useless. Much like Red Buff, if you could spread it around, it was pretty good. But if you couldn't, it was totally useless. It didn't do anything. So it got replaced with Stoneplate. I don't really have too much to say about Stoneplate. It seems like something that would have been useful, but it was never really as useful as it looked. it kind of ended up just being like a defensive item I threw on the champions to make them survive. But that was about it. Now, there were times where these numbers were way too high. Um, but like that got changed pretty quick. So there's not much else to say. This was like a remainder item you would make on a frontline champion. And lastly, they did change Spear of Sojourn. So the original Spear of Sojourn was giving a percentage, if I recall correctly, it was a percentage of your max mana, which could do like really obnoxious things on champions with a lot of mana. So they changed it so that it was just based off your basic attacks, so on hit. This became, as I said with Jinx, problematic when we got to like Sharpshooter. But their design changed, which is like gear to Jinx, which is it's fair, I guess. All right, so that was it for set 4.3. So let's move on to, or just set 4. Let's move on and talk about some of the things that on 4.5. So some things went in, some things went out. We talked about a little bit of all the things that went out, but let's talk about some of the things that came in. Blacksmith. Orin was a cool idea. So the only issue that I really have with Orin, there was two. There was two, actually. One was if you got him early. If you got Orin early, he could cause a lot of problems for other people. If you got an early, like, stage 4 Orin and was able to get an early item out of him, that could cause a lot of trouble. It allows you to take a little bit of extra time in stage 5 to figure out what your comp's going to be, because you could build around whatever item that was. Secondly, some of the items were horribly unbalanced. Eternal Winter was busted. It was straight up busted. It was like having 3 frozen orbs on your champion at once. It was just ridiculous how good Eternal Winter was. Meanwhile, other items were not good. Otherwise, Orin was fine. He kind of just played more as a 4-cost champion. You often would just get your items, sell them, and switch to something better. Daredevil. So yeah, let's talk about Samira. So Samira had a lot of issues this set. So Samira's ult did a lot of damage. Like, a lot of damage. And scaled with certain items way too well. Particularly Last Whisper and Deathblade. In general, what would happen was Samira would ult, and the weakest champion within that ult would die. She would get Deathblade stacks, and then kill everything else. So if one unit died within her ult, everything died within her ult. She also kind of moved around the board a lot, so she was kind of tricky to take down. In the end, I don't think Samira was particularly well designed, despite the fact that she looked super cool. Just jumping around the battlefield and blowing everything up always looked cool. But she wasn't, like, really fun to play against. I'm going to be honest, like, I won a lot of games running Nidalee reroll where I made a nut Samira. They're easy wins. Like, they weren't really all that fun, to be honest. Oops, hit my mic. Dragon Soul. I didn't play Dragon Soul that much. At first, Dragon Soul was really weak, but they eventually buffed it such that 6 Dragon Soul was actually pretty good. So one of the major problems that Dragon Soul had was that you, particularly when it first started, is that you only have this one blessing, and you didn't have a lot of control over who it went on, because it was whoever took damage first. So oftentimes it would be whichever thing you put out in front. But sometimes an assassin jumps a backline, hit one of your back end, and you're just like, this got it instead, and this isn't going to die. And I'm like, But the other part about Dragon Soul was this damage based off max health. So this was the thing that Set did that kind of got me angry, because if you had a good front line, then this kind of just negated it. Straight up negated it. Whatever. It was also really good on backliners who had a lot of attacks, who attacked really fast. So, notably Tristana. Like, Tristana was often just bait to eventually get this and then throw this 40% max health damage across. So, not overly a fan of Dragon Soul, despite the fact that, like, most of the champions in it were kind of neat and interesting. I don't really have a lot else to say about Dragon Soul. Executioner. So, the second coming of Valkyrie. Executioner is another one of those traits that's kind of, like, hard to notice actually doing anything. And part of the reason for that is because these cut lines are, like, too low to often notice. If you hit while they're at 66% health, it often just instant killed. If you hit at 30% health, it often would just instant kill. So, like, the point of these cut lines didn't really ever make sense to me. Because it's just killed. Also, 2 Executioner was useless, while 3 Executioner was, like, actually okay. If you're at 30% health, you're, like, already dead. Like, I liked the idea of Executioner, but I liked it better back when it was Valkyrie. Fabled. Unfortunately, Fabled never got to become what it could have been. In general, the biggest issue with Fabled was that the Fabled ability was so much stronger than the base ability that it made these base champions just kind of bad. You, like, just never played these base champions. Unless you had Fabled. The other thing was that a Fabled Chosen was probably actually bad. I was kind of the opinion that a Fabled Chosen would actually be really good and you would just play Nautilus and Nico and do Vanguard Mystic. That really wasn't that true. It was actually better just not to have a Chosen of any of them and just play them straight up, play all 3 straight up. So you would have the Fabled Cho'Gath ability, which was pretty useful. Slayer, I didn't like Slayer. I didn't like the design of Slayer. Slayer is kind of like Assassin, where you're just going to end up with a bunch of champions that just want to kill things, but, like, don't provide any utility. Which is pretty much what all 6 of these, with the exception of Pyke, do. Is they all just kind of try to kill things and don't provide any utility. Which is why I didn't like it, because it didn't scale well. So, in your composition, in order to turn on Slayer, you had to run 3 of these. So, you would run Pyke, you would run your carry, and then you'd find another one just to put up as, like, a secondary carry. And it's kind of silly because it's not, you're not really building a composition. You're just playing 3 champions and then putting some filler along with it. Just the front line. I did not like Slayer. It really didn't even really matter what the trait actually did. It just was kind of... It kind of blew up logic of, like, trying to make comps. Siphoner. I actually really kind of like Siphoner. The only issue with Siphoner was that for Siphoner was hard to play. You either didn't want to play Nasus or you didn't want to play Vladimir. So you would really never play this without a Chosen. But otherwise, I actually really like Siphoner. Giving all allies heal based off damage, and then having these Siphoners heal off their damage, really good. I think the only thing I really wish for was that more of them were like melee. Like, I think having Siphoner and Slayer at both at the same time was kind of silly. I think they probably should have just merged these 2 and just, like, cut out half the champions. Also, Siphoner being a 2-4 made it a lot more logical to play than playing Slayer, which was a 3-6. I guess I do have to talk about some of the new champions. We'll only talk about a few of them. Sivir. So, Sivir was another one of those experiences where, like, you do realize when you put Sivir in, like, Sivir is, like, spirit in one unit. Yeah, I'm not sure what they were thinking with Sivir, because they knew they had issues with Spirit, and they literally made this one unit champion that was Spirit. Uh, just put my hands up in the air. Nasus, I really like Nasus with Nasus Carry. Nasus Carry was a really cool idea. Unfortunately, they killed it at some point, so we never did it again. Kale is Kale. There's nothing to say about Kale. Kale is Kale. Kale is gonna do Kale things every time they put Kale in the game. Tristana was okay as an extra sharpshooter, just to fill in. Brand, I didn't like having both Brand and TF, because both of them kind of just do the same thing in being an early spellcaster. So, like, having both of them just kind of felt a little silly to me, especially when both of them were kind of supposed to be damage-based, even though Brand has a little more utility. Like, they're both damage champions. It's not like when we had, the previous set when we had, who was the Enlightened champion, who I forget now. Nami. Nami and TF, who Nami just provides pure utility while TF provides the damage. Braum never really got play. Shyvana carry happened. I think the only issue I have with Shyvana, and this is true with Swain as well, mage cap on them scaled way too high, and also didn't really make a lot of sense. Having these transforming ults instantly transform back to back, to get absurd HP bonuses, it just doesn't logically roll in with me. Olaf can Olaf. Swain. Yeah, that's it. Rakan. So when Rakan first came out, he was very busted. He was very, very busted. That's right. He gave himself a shield after he ulted, and he was unkillable. So you put a Sunfire cape on him, and he just blew up an entire board because they were all stunned. He gave himself a shield, so he was unkillable. Man. After they nerfed him, he was fine, but he was so busted. Xayah. So early on, Xayah was a decent carry, but later on, she kind of just became a unit. Which is kind of a shame because she had a really cool ult and really cool design on her ult, being both scaling off AP and AD. But, yeah, I don't really know what else to say there. Like, she started off good, scaling well with Hodge, and then didn't. After they nerfed Hodge. I don't think they even nerfed her. They nerfed Hodge, and she became not very good. Darius sucks. I'm not talking about Darius. Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol was such an awful design, in my opinion. I knew it when I saw Aurelion Sol that he was probably going to be a bad design. And the issue with Aurelion Sol, first off, without mage, he's useless. Actually useless. This is kind of true with a lot of the mages, is that unless you actually triggered the mage trait, most mages were pretty bad. Most of them were not really worth playing. Aurelion Sol especially. My issue with Aurelion Sol was this overcharge. This overcharge lasts 10 seconds, first off, and does 50% bonus damage on his ult. It ends up being so much damage that if something is, like, it doesn't even matter if the first one hit. If they were overcharged and he ulted over them, he killed them. He just killed them. It was 50% more damage. I thought that this number and this time should have been way less, and then they could have buffed up his base damage. Actually, they probably didn't even need to buff up his base damage. He would have been fine. Okay, maybe they need to buff it like 10%. But, there was too much that needed to happen to play ASOL, and he did too much to the board because of it. I honestly think ASOL was just bad design. And going back, I hope we don't see something like this again. And it's hard for me to say whether this is an issue because of the mage trait or if this is an issue with just how they designed him to function with the mage trait. Talked about Nico, Nautilus, Cho'Gath, Tryndamere. Tryndamere never really got a chance to shine, in my opinion. Tryndamere was Tryndamere was like the same thing with Aatrox and Sejuani. You had Olaf and you had Tryndamere, and they were both 4 cost, they were both side by side, and they both fit the same role as carries. You can't just like play both and have them both itemize. Only one of them is going to be your carry, and you're most likely going to land on Olaf because Olaf was probably a little better. Whatever. And we already talked about Samira. Remove champions, yeah, they got rid of Dust, Tormented, Hunter, handful of other champions, Moonlight Dazzler, Shade, yeah, we've kind of talked about that. Oh, and the changing of traits. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add here. What was interesting was when Diana went from Moonlight Assassin to Spirit Assassin, I actually thought Diana was going to be awful, and she really wasn't. She was actually pretty good. She might have even been better than she was in Moonlight, which is kind of shocking, to be honest. Yeah, when we went through these items, the big thing was Eternal Winter was busted. Item changes. Wow, I didn't remember all of these item changes that they did. That's kind of wild. See if I can hit anything that's big. Yeah, Jewel Gauntlet always did too much bonus damage. Like, this was always too high. Sojin. Oh, they buffed Sojin. When did they buff Sojin? Oh, that's right. When they got rid of Jinx, they felt safe to buff Sojin again. Ah, that's right. I remember now. Reworked Static. Yeah. So they changed Ludens because of Nami. The Nami build was like way too strong. It was a lot of damage that build did. Gunblade. Oh, they changed the shield. No, that was old. They always had that shield. Buff Static, nerf Shiv, nerfed Deathcap. Giant Slayer got changed a bunch of times, as I recall. It was originally in set 4 it was a flat bonus damage, and then later on they gave it this like bonus part where it did extra damage to things with lots of HP, and then they kept like changing the numbers between those two. I do not remember this. This was they probably nerfed this before because of Diana and then felt like they could bring it back as Moonlight was gone. Hurricane. I remember when they kept bringing up Hurricane. I think Hurricane originally was like 50% damage, and then they pushed it to like 90, and I knew there was an issue there. And people quickly found out that there was an issue there when you put it on a unit. And they ended up nerfing that. Yeah, when Hurricane was like at its peak, it was way too strong. War Week. Everyone remembers War Week. War Week. Yeah. They added the Lucky Lantern. Lucky Lantern was kind of just an add-on. You know, I don't really have anything bad to say about Lucky Lantern. There was a few bad things that could pop up in Lucky Lantern. I think like the double training dummy was pretty bad. But otherwise, I don't really have anything bad to say about Lucky Lanterns. I know to a lot of people it probably wasn't the most like dynamic change to the game. It was probably the most minor thing they could have physically done, but I kind of liked it. It was like, oh, look what we all got. It was a nice gift, and these items actually, the Reforger and the Magnetic Remover, you kind of had to think about how you wanted to use them. A lot of pros got really good at using Magnetic Remover. I didn't, but I did get a lot better at using the Reforger. The Forger was a pretty cool item. Anyway, that's it. I just kind of wanted to take this time, go over all of some of the changes that came up in set 4. What worked, what didn't work, what I liked, what I didn't like. So hopefully, like, we'll kind of have an understanding as we move on to further sets of what designs we'd like to see TFT move towards and what we'd like to see them move away from. Um, so I know this video was a bit long, but there was a good bit to talk about, I think. Maybe. Anyway, that's it. I hope you all enjoyed it. See you next time.